Hey guys, Scott Adams here. So today we're starting a new web show called Ecom Evolving. And the idea is that, so many of us have been around the space for a long time, especially if you just go to a broader audience of e-commerce. Like, we're a lot of, our audience, like, in a lot of like my background and Mari and our guest today, his background is around payments and fraud. But without payments, you wouldn't have e-commerce. So we're starting there. But then over time, what we plan to do is do a lot of other interviews, talk about other topics across kind of the whole broad spectrum of e-commerce, and thinking kind of more about like how it was, so like the past, talk about what's going on now, and then finally to the present. I mean, to the future. So with that, just so you know a little bit about me, if we haven't met yet. So like I said, I'm Scott Adams. I've been doing fraud risk payments for a little over 20 years now. I started out as an engineer and quickly got involved with an ebook company. If you guys remember those, it was, we literally sold a Word document online, accepted credit cards, and that was it. But it was a multi-million-dollar business. But later we grew it much faster, much bigger by adding recurring payments, which is what got us in trouble with fraud. I mean, after that, I worked at Riot Games and consulted for Epic Games, both around payments and fraud and getting their chargebacks down, these kind of things. And then finally built a VMPI facilitator that later was absorbed by Count. So I worked there for a while, and now I'm doing this and doing consulting. We also have Mari Peroni online here. Mari, you want to give a little intro?
Thanks, Scott. I had a different start than many in our industry. I started out as a teacher down in Brazil teaching English. And you may think that this is not related to our field, but it taught me how to break down complex topics and to convey that knowledge to other people. Back in 2000, I moved to Europe. And my first job in England was at Lego as a customer support. Later on, I was hired by Jagex to work within the community. And my claim to fame there was that we had a low retention of new players. So I fought for it and created a program called Recruit a Noob. A noob means new players. So basically, experienced players would then partner with new players and teach them how to play. This made them feel welcome and eased into the game. The results for that was an increase of 30% of new visitors from social media back then to a forums and in-game, and 20% retention of new players. Then I worked for Riot Games in Brazil. I was recruited to the billing team, where I saw tons of fraud. And the systems that were created for the US did not work for Brazil. So I made it my mission at a corporate offsite to meet and convince the fraud guys from the headquarters to let me have a Brazilian team, a Brazilian fraud team. I had to show them that you cannot apply the same rules that they use in the USA in Brazil because it doesn't work due to the culture. And that's also how I met Scott. From there, we worked in, obviously, I got the front team. I won it. And we worked in many other projects, which later on led me to be here where I am today as a business partner with Scott.
Thanks, Mari. Then we also have our special guest today is Polly Bauer. You want to give a little intro about yourself, Polly?
Oh, yes, and thank you so much for having me. Some of you know me as a veteran in the credit card industry for 40 plus years. I'm not going to tell you how many plus. I was privileged to be the past president and CEO of the Home Shopping Network Credit Corporation, where I ran the credit card transactions and credit card industry business for a $1 billion television company. And that's during the days when if you bought online or bought on the phone, everybody thought you were fraudulent. So that was a fun thing to do for 11 years. I am also a
Awesome.
certified professional speaker. I'm an award-winning author where I talk about credit cards and credit for consumers on my 2 books online. And I'm a consultant. So it's fun. Scott and I and Mari still work together and get to see each other in the payments industry. And that was very, very important to me. So it still is, and we're going strong and having a wonderful time at it. So thanks for having me today.
And thanks for joining us. So, as everyone can see, really, we basically have a panel of experts here in payments and fraud, but also by translation and necessity in e-commerce. We want to kind of talk about like the past, the present, the future, because this world is changing so fast. But that's one reason why we wanted to have Polly on, because some of the things that we still see today were happening at the beginning of credit cards and e-commerce too. Like I was around a lot with e-commerce in the beginning. Polly was around at the start of the credit cards. And so we thought we'd kind of start there. So Polly and I were talking before the show, and one of the things that came up was that it used to not be so easy for a merchant. Now you go to Stripe, you go to PayPal, click a few buttons, you have a merchant account. But in the past, it was a whole lot harder. So Paul, you want to really share some of the story with us around that?
Absolutely. I was very privileged to get to be an apprentice, so to speak, in back office of a bank that was just starting in my state accepting credit cards. And even then, I thought it was very, very strange that the retailers who were going to accept credit card payments had to have a jumbo CD in the bank. Now, that was a bank requirement. That was not a credit card requirement. But I'm thinking, if you've got a jumbo in that bank, why are they, I mean, hello, they've got a lot of security against you, but they didn't know how this was going to work. First cards were paper, and it was an exciting time. But I go back at it today and go, oh my gosh, they're so worried about a new startup grandmother doing a jewelry thing online. Those were the days. We couldn't have existed at that time doing them that way.
Yeah, I just think it's insane that you had to actually have a CD with a bank to get a merchant account. Like even 20 years ago, you didn't even have to have that.
Right.
Maybe a small deposit for like a reserve, but
right.
It's so much harder than.
Well, and cards were just starting. So, they weren't too sure what was going to happen, how people would, protect themselves, and would a merchant, they didn't think about fraud. They were just like, oh, I got to protect my retailer, and I got to protect my consumer. So it was a different mindset.
Even now, we kind of, most merchants, and how the bank is liable, the acquirer's liable. There's all these people in the loop that it costs them money if the merchant does poorly, or if they go bankrupt.
Right.
So, in a way it makes sense. But yet, like anything else, if it's hard to onboard somebody, hard to bring somebody into the fold of doing something, it's going to be much harder to get them rolling. And so it seems like things have improved, I guess, in some ways with that.
And as you can imagine, not many merchants could afford to take credit card payments because of what was going on. I mean, this kind of almost relates a little bit to what's going on in Silicon Valley right now. Yes. We'll give you the money, we'll give you a loan, but you got to keep it
no
here.
Idea,
and
really,
then what happened with that. Not that that was a bad thing to do, but I think people overreacted and went into some major panic. So
I think it's very common whenever there's a big change, especially when it involves money, people tend to be very skeptical as to whether it's going to work or not, and pragmatic. So they go more to the negative side. Oh, a lot of things can go wrong, but they don't focus too much on the solution, more so on the problems, and it takes time to adapt as well, change mindset.
Back in those days, you could be a MasterCard bank or a Visa bank. Except, let's really go back. It was a Master Charge Bank or a Bank AmeriCard, which became Visa, Bank AmeriCard Bank. So you had one brand or another. Yeah. You didn't accept, you didn't issue payments. I think the merchant could accept any kind of MasterCard or Visa, but the bank was considered one or the other.
I think another area that things have changed, like, I remember back, when I first started, traveling internationally. As Americans, I think we think this a lot, that everybody's like us and that everything works like us. And, it's a credit card. It works everywhere. But things have changed a lot with that too. Like, Mari and I were talking about it, how international cards and different payment methods, just they weren't accepted.
When I first started at Jagex, I was responsible for the community, and that comes billing and also, fraud. And the payment methods we had back then was credit card or debit card, especially for subscription. And one of the things they had just introduced was gift cards, but they were looking into different type payment methods for other countries. We talked about Boleto, and Boleto is a very Brazilian type of payment method, and they didn't know what it was. Gift cards, the way culturally speaking works back in the UK, The difference, in Brazil was a big deal. There was a lot of fraud involving gift cards in Brazil, and they didn't know why. Coming from there, it's easier for me to understand the culture. So it was easier to fix that problem. The local payment methods are very different.
Whenever, back, and this is even, 15 years ago, probably, but at the beginning of all this, was international even a thought?
It was a very different situation, and people were traveling internationally thinking their card was going to work. They didn't tell the bank they were traveling internationally, so the bank would see something that was an attempt and immediately block your card, which is really tough when you're in a foreign country. And you had to prove that you were there and you had the card. And it was frightening for them. As soon as they saw an international transaction, number one, they may not work. Number two, they could block it very, very easily. Number three, they'd watch to see if you tried to use it to get money out of some kind of a cash machine or an ATM machine. And I can remember being in Switzerland, going to a grocery store when I was keynote speaking there and trying to buy groceries, and it wouldn't take any of my cards. It was like, I just wanted things to take, like bottled water and things to take back to the room before and after the speech. I couldn't get anything to work. So that was a scary thing.
The app knows, right? If you've got your phone, the app can tell where you are.
Yep.
And so they kind of figure it out. I know some of my cards, I don't have to tell at all. They just happen to know.
I think even back then, 10 years ago, I remember my first trip. I was back in Brazil and I was going to the UK, and I lost my cards. And it was such a hassle to be able to retrieve it and call the bank and explain what was happening. So that was a big deal as well.
I remember, when I got started in these things, and I was an engineer, and an e-commerce merchant had been basically just given a merchant account or mini merchant accounts. I didn't know there was anywhere to turn. No one wanted to talk to me. The bank didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to educate me. I got really lucky in that a marketing company I was working with went to a conference, their CEO, and at that conference, somebody was speaking and they talked about credit cards. And that's actually how Polly and I met. It wasn't her, but somebody else was speaking there. That guy told me, okay, hey, you've got to go talk to this one specific processor that doesn't exist anymore, and you need to go to this event, Payments Ed. And just randomly, I ended up getting on the board, and I meet Polly. And so, I think one of the things I wanted Polly to talk about today was her experience in getting that going, because merchants needed it so bad, even more so in a way when things started.
Well, gosh, Scott, that was so exciting. We had a group of merchants that I had relationships with that used to call me and say, hey, we got this card number, and I know everybody's panicking now, but we have this card number, and I think there's fraud happening on it. And so we'd have like 7 merchants, and we'd talk to each other and say, are you guys getting hit? Are you getting hit? What's happening? So I had relationships with these folks. Now a processor, the same one that's not in business anymore, we had conversations about, I had come from the banking industry, so I knew from the card companies and card associations how they thought and how they did business. But merchants were like, look, would somebody listen to me? So this was very much a leader of this processor, and they had a meeting in Columbus, Ohio, and an agreement came through that Master Charge would attend, which had moved to Visa from Bank America, would attend. And it was to be an educational session where all the merchants that came brought information about their fraud tracking, the systems they had internally, how they processed a card, so we could educate the card associations that we weren't bad people because the card came across the phone or the card came across the computer. And also the card associations could not only learn what merchants needed to do, but also learn how merchants thought. It was a 2-day meeting. I remember back in the day when, the 2 brands did not want to be in the same room with each other. And it got a little verbally loud one of the days where, until we all finally said, hey, we're all here together and we all want to win. You want the sale as much as we want the sale. We want our customer to come back continually to be here with us. We put a lot of money in getting new clients and keeping them and retaining them. So we'll do whatever that you want us to do? And I was so proud of those merchants because they literally just opened their kimono and said, hey guys, this is the way the business happens with us. Here's our back office. You're welcome to come visit. And I can tell you both brands did come to Home Shopping Network and saw our fraud prevention, our fraud detection, and our fraud department. And they were shocked that merchants had a fraud department. But what came out of that was the need and the commitment and the heartfelt way of serving other merchants that both brands said, okay, we'll come back to a meeting every single year. And at that time it was called Direct Response Forum. We'll come back to a meeting every single year if three things happen. Number one, I want a board of directors, of volunteers, board of directors to help educate merchants. Number two, those merchants can expect from everybody that's on the board that they'll get a minimum of 8 hours a month educating other merchants so we all can stay in business. And we would like to, at the next meetings and ones every year, we'd like to learn from you guys. This was the card associations. And we'd like to teach you some of the things that we're going to do. And out of that, some of you that are very large merchants, we'd like you to be able to share with us what your opinions are on some of these regulation changes. So it was a very, very successful meeting. And it not only was it a successful meeting, but this year in August in San Diego will be our 35th year. It's now called Payments Education Online. And you can go online and do Payments Education Forum. It's going to be the first week in August. It's 2 of the sharpest days you'll ever have for a very low investment. And your bosses should just be knocking down the doors to get you there. I can tell you from the first, almost every single one of these meetings, I've learned something that's helped my business. And I'm very, very proud of the board. And I'm very proud of Scott because he did a tremendous job for us. And there's some exciting things that are going to come up. And we meet together as like senior eagles for the board and support the board. But, it's great to watch people with a big heart who say, oh, look, I do it this way. And I remember the first time one of the folks said to me, you're sitting beside QBC. And I'm like, well, of course I am. Well, aren't they your competitor? I said, no, they're my colleague. I can learn from them. They can learn from me. And that's what happens at that event.
Sometimes people think that we're rivals in this type of industry, and we're not, because what happens to one business, it's going to happen soon enough to another one. So why not share knowledge? You put a lot of expert people, a lot of smart people out there together and say, okay, let's navigate together through this issue, because if it affects one person, it's going to affect it all.
That's kind of where it's kind of a similar experience in that, whenever I got introduced to Polly and to the payments ed team and attended my first event, it was eye-opening because, one thing, the competition, like I didn't work for a big company at the time, but that's one thing I kind of wondered, well, but I'm a little company. How's this going to help me? Because it's look at all the names on this list. The people are going were from big brand names everyone would know. But what I learned really quickly, both at the event and then as I got to know the people on the board, was that we all have the same problems. It's just the scale might be different, but that doesn't make it less important. My little business would be, super concerned with, really almost any chargebacks. But, the bigger business might not care as much on a few, but generally they don't get a few, they get a lot more. And so it's just different scales, but the same problem and generally also the same solutions. And I think something they're talking kind of in the present now is that, we have payments ed, and we've got a bunch of other events too. And they're continue to evolve. Even like with COVID, that kind of messed some of that up and things slowed down. Nobody had, in-person events for a little while, but now I'm starting to see the events picking back up and having a lot more attendees. And so that's amazing. It's a place to collaborate. I think that's so important. I think that's a good evolution we've seen that, bringing us now is that those things have happened. I do really love it, to be able to do that. And like Mari said, like when I was with a larger company with Riot Games, that was a concern. When I went to the event the first time, my boss said, well, don't share anything. And I told him, well, I'm going to share things. but I'm not going to share anything that's a secret to the company, not the details of the inner workings of the company or the new game coming out. So you need to collaborate.
One of the biggest conferences I've been to, the first ones, there's so many people there, and I joined a panel, and one of the questions they had was, how do you see payment methods, within 5 years? We started talking about payment methods and how the US was transitioning from signature credit cards with signature in the back to pins. And that was a big deal because everybody was concerned. Oh my God, how are we going to deal with that? Meanwhile, I'm thinking, this is going on in Brazil for 10 years. How come we haven't talked about that? If we're talking about payment methods, and it's not just national, but international, because there were so many people from so many places there. Every time I came to the US, my card, which was a PIN card, but they didn't accept, so I had to sign, I would sign a heart. This is how much fraud was not being seen. I would put a smiley face or a heart in it. And my signature was accepted. So I think those conferences are very important for that type of thing too. You don't know. You may think that you don't have the answers, but there's that person right there that knows. The other thing that we talked about, I mentioned, I think contactless payment. So you would be able to go to a store, purchase what you want, and leave without having to literally use your card. And 5 years later, I'm looking through my LinkedIn, and there you go. Amazon had just launched the first store about that. So that's interesting how to see where things are heading to. And that's one of the main important things when you go to a conference, because you may think I'm a little guy among a lot of smart people. I may not have anything to add to it. And you do.
One of the exciting things that I want to share that's going to happen this time is, when was the last time that you could pick up the phone and call somebody from Diners or Discover Card? Or if you were a merchant and not that you couldn't get through, but it goes through another level. What's so exciting about this organization is that we have now branched out. There are fireside chats with Discover and JCB. I love to hear what's going on with JCB, because I was just asked to do a presentation at a university here for some young folks that are going international, and they didn't know what JCB was, or where the card came from, or what the logo was, even though they said they'd seen it at Disney a lot. American Express is there. There are different kinds of processors there. It's not a selling situation, it's educational. But what's great about it is we get information back into the board that says, wow, I just went to a fireside chat with Discover Card, and I had my questions answered that I came here for. If I was going back home right now, my heart is full. I've learned a lot. I have somebody to contact, and that's what makes it great. Is we collaborate. We all are together. Whether you're a card company, whether you're a consumer, whether you're a merchant. Now, when I say consumer, there's a couple of the consumers there that are also merchants.
I think something, when Polly and I were talking, one of the interesting things too. What do you think, Polly, about that? Like how that's looking, and versus the past, where there weren't so many.
Well, I will tell you, the chairman of the board that I worked for many years used to say to me, Bauer, I don't care if you accept a Shell oil card. Keep the customer happy, make sure they get their merchandise on time, and have them come back and buy again. So he really had a vision as to how many more levels of payments were going to be available. What I think is amazing now is merchants not only get the education, but now they know what kind of choices they have. And they can test to say, well, I may want to accept this brand, or I may want to do that. And they can do some testing. And Scott, they can pick up the phone and call any of us. When we talk about the present and we talk about what's going on, merchants don't have their hands tied anymore. They can ask questions. They have a place to go. They can get the support that they need. And it was not always that way. They get an opportunity to learn what's out there. I had so much fun. I did my Swipe the podcast, which is going up tomorrow, but I did it on local fraud. And Scott, I kept track for 3 days of how many companies contacted me. Same scenario, every one of them. Okay, well, we've closed your Amazon account. No, you haven't. And you're not coming from an Amazon link site. And you didn't approve the purchase of a $549 laptop. No, I didn't, because that's not me. And then they went on, okay, now we know you're fraud. We're going to close your PayPal account. And I'm like, how would somebody react? Would they call the number that's on that phone, which is fraudulent? Would they try to go into that link because maybe they're scared and they're older and they haven't had a chance to go through this before? But I am telling you, I had 11 attempts in 3 days, 3 different scenarios. And so now merchants and consumers can go, not happening. And of course, we always tell you, listen, honey, if somebody picks up the phone and says they're from Medicare or the IRS, or they're calling you from the White House, no, they're not. It's absolutely fraud. But I just love it when the last one said to me, hi, I'm calling from the White House. I said, good, let me talk to the president. It's a bang. He hung up immediately. So, consumers are in a better place right now because of what's going on now, and the future is going to be wonderful. Merchants are in better places because they can get the information. And again, after they attend a conference, they can pick up the phone and call any of us, and we're there to help as volunteers. So I'm really, really excited for what's happening in the payment industry.
Yeah, so I'll throw out one thing, if consumers are listening, which, we're all consumers, but if you're not sure, maybe even if you are, don't call the number, don't click the link. Right. Go, if it's from your credit card company, turn over the back of the card and call that number. And, if it's real, they'll know. If it's not, you've only lost a couple minutes instead of maybe a lot of money. That actually happened just so happens when I was in Tampa last time and saw Polly. This happened to me, but it ended up not being a scam. It was actually Amex, but it was just weird how the text was. And so I did not call the number on the card. I did not call the number on the text. I called the number on the card later, and they confirmed it to be real. But it's just how the text was structured bothered me. And so I followed my own advice, and this time it wouldn't have been a bit bad, but either way, I just say, go to what you know. Don't use something someone else gives you, because you don't know where it's going to go and what it can do. But then, so go, that's one of the things I do like, though. Right now, I think is in the present for e-commerce is really interesting, especially around fraud and payments, because you do have, like the text alerts that tell you, I see every transaction on my credit card go through my text. Yeah. So if I didn't do it, one of my kids didn't do it, I know it's fraud, and I know immediately, which lets me stop the fraud for the future.
Absolutely.
And I think more and more is coming too, especially I think for the future. One of the things that the card brands are doing is they're getting closer and closer to the consumer, which some might say is bad, but I actually think it's kind of good, because there's so much data that they have that we don't have. And they're trying to shorten the cycles. It used to be that fraud cycles, like chargeback cycles, all these things took forever. Now, at least in the United States, they're pretty quick, and they're getting quicker. And so one thing I'm excited about, which is the future, but coming actually really, really soon, is Visa's Compelling Evidence 3, because it's going to allow merchants to, in real time, pass information that you would have shared during a representment process, and automatically block 10.4 chargebacks, which are fraud. Polly, what are you seeing? Like, what are you most excited about for the future with payments and fraud?
I love the fact that the consumers can really start to feel safe now. Even though we're talking about unusual situations where people are attempting fraud. And I also watched when the president made an announcement about a student loan changes, because I have some individuals that I work with and some organizations that I work with, is they were just slammed. Students were slammed with telephone calls saying, oh, yes, did you understand what the president said? And by the way, I'm your loan officer. Well, no, they aren't. There's a lot of stuff that's why I'm doing some teaching now at the universities and some of the schools, telling them, hey, buyer beware, literally. As soon as something hits the media, now we have people educated. So I think that's really, really important. I feel better that the consumers, because, I have my podcast, you have yours, that we spend a lot of time educating consumers, that we literally spend time educating merchants as well. So I'm very, very excited about that. I think it's going to be a very easy, very smooth transition pretty shortly. as to how we buy, when we buy. Just, think about, I don't think there's anybody in Starbucks that ever hands them a card anymore. Everybody gives them their phone. And then it knows exactly what card to put it to. So that makes it easy, makes it easier for consumers to do things that they need to do every day. And I love the fact that consumers can feel safer and that they're educated, that they go, wait a minute, this isn't for me. So, they used to tease me at Home Shopping Network that I had a black belt in shopping. And I said, yeah, I had the greatest job ever on the planet. I could, with security around me, go down to the Golden Diamond Center downstairs and in the security area, if I had a really bad day, and I could just take a deep breath around all those jewels and go, okay, get your act together. Back upstairs. This is what you're doing. You're protecting the consumer, you're protecting the merchant, and go back to work. So yes, I do have a black belt in shopping, and it's, changed a little bit recently, but, has to do with how much stuff do you need? And so we're seeing that we don't need as much stuff as we thought we did. But it's really wonderful that I think we're coming into a better place. Do I think that the fraud's going to go away? No, Scott. But I sleep very well knowing that you and Mari are helping international people when they come to the States learn how to do business. And I've watched you in action. I'm very proud of you, and you've done a tremendous job. I've been blessed to have opportunities to hear you speak at associations and organizations. I'm so thrilled what you're doing with your community, and it's a real blessing for all of us. So I'm glad to, kind of run behind you and watch to see what's going on. And that we're all committed to supporting each other and making sure that the merchant understands they have lots of us out there fighting for them.
I would reciprocate that, Pauline, that, it's been really great, that you literally one of the first people I met in payments. Been able to watch you do so many cool things and educate me, especially early on in my career around payments fraud, and then even, public speaking. So that's been also something great that, had I not followed that advice, I don't think I would be near where I am today, because, being able to speak is such a sought after skill. I think around, the future. So, we mostly talk about credit cards, just, it's such a huge part of the United States. And that's what, Paul and I have dealt with for all our whole careers, really. But something I realized as I started to travel, internationally, is that cards aren't the only thing. And one thing we've been doing in the States a little bit, mostly so far, consumer to consumer, like person to person, is like bank transfers. And so it's real time and like real time payments. In the States, other than a few services that are almost solely consumer to consumer, we've not had very good methods to do this. But that's one thing that, I wanted Mari to kind of enlighten us around, is that Brazil has this new payment method called Pix, which is pretty cool. And the adoption is incredible.
Well, it's been in Brazil ever since the pandemic, really. That's when the Central Bank of Brazil launched. And we've had, I think, if I'm not mistaken, up to 70% of consumers conversion, compared to credit cards. It's a big hit nowadays in Brazil. Pix is paid, consumer to consumer payment method. And what's interesting about is it's easy. You don't need to have a bank account to be able to make to transfer money. Now, it's such a good payment method, that there are many countries that are trying to replicate and or use Pix, merge with the Brazilian version to be able to provide to the consumers. I know in the U.S. you have FedNow, which is the Central American Bank is actually working on that as well. And I know in Colombia we have as well. Colombia is actually in the talks. If I'm not mistaken, they have merged or they're about to use Pix. It's an easy access, and the fraud is, well, we cannot say there's no such thing as there's no fraud, but it's very low risk. So, if you want to do a bank transfer, instead of waiting, which in the past in Brazil for a bank transfer could take up to 7 business days. There was always like this, hassle among those issues. But now with Pix, it's straightforward. You make a payment and within seconds it's in the other person's account. And all you need is a QR code or via email or even your phone number.
Yeah, I think, Polly, have you been following Pix or FedNow? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I've just started since we talked not long ago. I've just been kind of researching what's going on and learning because there's so much excitement going around it.
You also need fraud to continue to evolve in it because the fraud guys, the people perpetrating the fraud, will evolve. And so now, we need to evolve.
Absolutely.
And, which looks at, when you talk about these real-time payments, like we've had one for a while in the States called Zeal. Mm-hmm. And Venmo. It's kind of weird though, and Venmo and PayPal.
Right.
But like Zeal especially, though, has been attacked because it's so real time and there's really no way to dispute those charges.
Right.
And there's no regulations really around it. Like, some sort of apply, but it's not really sure how that's going to work. And so, we need more and more things to protect these kind of things. I think the banks need to step up and have much better anti-fraud in place than they do now.
Right.
But, because there's all these scams happening and it's unreal just how, because things move so fast, regulations don't have time to keep up. That's about all the time we have for today. Any parting words, Polly?
I have to say I'm very lucky and I'm very blessed. And as a young girl, I made up my mind because people keep saying to me, aren't you retiring? Why don't you retire? Boy, you're getting old. It's like, well, I love what I do, number one. But, for me, I was at the right place at the right time as a young girl when credit cards were just coming out. And I did my research and I did my homework and I set my goals. I had totally focused on, I wanted the first 20 years of my career to be focused on the card brands. I wanted to learn everything I could learn and be involved with and work with the card brands. And I was blessed that happened. I wanted the second 20 years of my career, so that gets us up to the 40 years. I wanted the second 20 years of my career to be totally understanding what a merchant does, who a merchant is, what a merchant needs to know. And as you know, the door opened for Home Shopping Network, and I spent 11 of those 20 years there. And then I have merchant accounts and things that I do for my speaking and my business now. So that was a blessing. And to make the full circle of the transaction, you need to understand all 3 pieces. And the last was, how do I help consumers? So I'm on my last 20 years. Most people don't have a 60-year career, but I'm on my last 20 years focused on how can I help the consumer? What can I do to educate? And that's how Swipe the Podcast grew up. And we do education for consumers constantly. And I'm also teaching, going to some of the schools, fire departments, police departments, and talking to people about finance and credit and, just especially the school systems. So many of our schools, especially in Florida, do not have updated information that kids need to know about finance or be able to talk to their parents. So my ending notes for you are always pay forward, learn everything you can learn. If you don't know, ask, and be grateful for the time that you have. This is a wonderful gratitude that I have to you guys today. And I so appreciate your opportunity for me to be on here with you.
Awesome. I actually do need to pick your brain too, Polly, because I think with all your experience and everything you've done so far, it's amazing.
Hopefully people will enjoy this episode and then we'll have many more to come.